Knack is the kind of game that I was optimistically looking forward to. Over the last 7 years, the realm of video games has been heavily flooded with FPS games and the sort. It always excites me to see something that seemed to have been forgotten. In this case, it's platformers and simplistic gameplay. Knack was made with the intent of bringing back these ideas. Very easy to play, but difficult to master. The kind of difficulty reminiscent of games made 20 years ago. Knack, for the most part, captures the essence of that well, but at the same time it also highlights some of the issues of doing gameplay like that in the 21st century. If you're playing Knack for its gameplay, then the story will be secondary to you, which in this case is a good scenario because the story falls flat. The plot centers around the Doctor and his creation, Knack. Early on, human settlements are attacked by goblins using high-tech weaponry. In an effort to fight the goblins, the humans retaliate with specific volunteers. The Doctor, Knack, the Explorer, and the Billionaire all vouch for the cause. What then happens is 2 or 3 obvious U-turns that any player can see coming. This story is just a mess all around. There is no character development at all. In fact, in most cases, all characters are very unlikable. There's no real sense of motivation or understanding of the plot. The pacing is also quite odd too, making extreme sporadic jumps without filling in any of the gaps, or explaining any important information at all. Most cutscenes divulge into characters having cheesy one-liners and making themselves unlikable, and exchanging lifeless dialogue. I wouldn't peg Knack to be the kind of game that needs an amazing story, but what's here could be way more. Playing Knack is where you may or may not have a bigger issue. Like I mentioned earlier, the game was made with classic video games in mind. The day where games only had 1 or 2 buttons, 1 or 2 moves, and the difficulty was very high. It's meant to be simplistic and easy to play, but offer a level of challenge that games 20 years ago did. This is where I think Knack actually succeeds. The camera is fixed onto Knack, and you enter in new rooms fighting enemies. You can punch, dodge, and do a jump attack. Rooms will be filled with 1 to 8 enemies of varying variety. Some are close combat, others are long range. It can quite honestly be a difficult game. On normal difficulty alone, I faced a number of challenging levels. Hard and very hard mode offer an even greater level of challenge. Knack himself is made of relics, and he can lose or gain them throughout the game, and this reflects the gameplay. The smaller you are, the more damage you take. That, and you cause less damage to enemies. On the flip side, the bigger you are, the less damage you take, and the easier it is to dispatch enemies. Further on in the game, you'll even attach other things to Knack's body, like ice and wood, and these are impacted on the environments you're in, like ice melting in the sun. It adds a nice layer of depth to the idea that your player is constantly changing in size. With all that said, I think Knack does well in the gameplay department. That is, if you can bear it for so long. Knack offers something that you may not want, which is an 8-hour campaign of simplistic gameplay. A lot of levels tend to drag out, and it can indeed feel very repetitive. Now, a lot of games can be labeled as repetitive, but Knack can really suffer from this when it's centered around gameplay of games that usually only lasted an hour long. If you are dying for this kind of gameplay in a modern era, then Knack may be for you after all. What Knack does really well is look fantastic. Knack is a launch PlayStation 4 game, and while it is not groundbreakingly ahead of PS3 hardware, it still looks phenomenal. And one thing Knack does really well is offer a vast variety of environments. Now, Knack also features local multiplayer co-op. At any time, a second DualShock 4 can be turned on to have another Knack on screen. The only problem here is that co-op is pretty half-baked. The camera does not pan out to fit the screen for both players, it will only follow player 1. That, and player 2 is essentially invincible. He can take way more damage and respawn after only a few seconds, effectively ruining any challenge the game had. But if you're just here to play a game with your friend and fool around, then this will be just fine. I really enjoyed Knack for the first 3 hours I played, but the more I played, the more apparent the problems were. There's a lot of questions you gotta ask yourself before you decide to try Knack. Do you want a difficult game? One that is 8 hours or so long, that features very simple gameplay, but a pretty bad story? If you can answer all those questions with a yes, then Knack may be for you. But if you say no to 1 or 2 of those, then you might want to reconsider Knack.